This is your host, Pastor David Grisham, with Last Frontier Evangelism Radio. We're here speaking to you on KOAN Hot Talk Radio, 95.1 FM and 1080 AM. And this is the station where we take Jesus to the streets and we take liberals to the woodshed. And today we're going to take the Huffington Post to the woodshed because they wrote an article along with USA Today, and it was on Fox News, and apparently the actress Hilary Duff and her boyfriend, a man by the name of Mr. Walsh, offended quite a few people at their Hollywood party they went to for Halloween at George Clooney's house in Hollywood this past weekend. And apparently it was a tequila party and everybody was having a good time, and they came dressed as a couple of special characters they thought went well together, and it offended a lot of liberals, and now they're backpedaling and apologizing and saying they're so sorry, they didn't mean to offend anyone. And I think this incident is a great example of the contrast between what is true and the false narrative of our society today. Now, what did they dress up as that was so offensive? Well, apparently Mr. Walsh dressed up as an Indian. And by that I mean Native American. The reason I say Indian instead of Native American is because that's what the Indians call themselves. I preached a powwow, the largest powwow in North America, in Albuquerque of this year, and they call themselves Indians. They're not offended by that. That's what they call themselves, so that's what I choose to call them too. He was dressed as an Indian. It was not offensive. He looked like he was some sort of an extra in a John Wayne movie, wearing his leather outfit and his bonnet with feathers, and his eyes were painted red, and he looked like a movie-type Indian. He sure did. And now, Miss Hilary Duff, however, was dressed a little bit differently. She was dressed as a quote-unquote sexy pilgrim. And she apologized for this being offensive. She did not apologize for her outfit. We'll get to that in just a minute. She apologized for her boyfriend's outfit because, she just didn't realize it was so racist to dress as an Indian. And that the Huffington Post writes here, let me quote from it, Cole Delbrick wrote previously, Duff and Walsh's costumes would be offensive in any year, not just 2016, considering the history of violence toward Native communities in the U.S. Walsh's costume is also particularly tone-deaf given the current situation surrounding the proposed Dakota Access Pipeline, which would approach the Standing Rock Sioux Tribe Reservation in North Dakota. The Sioux people argue that the pipeline will destroy their sacred sites and contaminate their water. Protesters have been demonstrating since construction began. So apparently, because this protest is going on, him dressing up as an Indian was just awful. Now, there's a lot of misconceptions about this so-called offensive costume. First of all, pilgrims were never violent towards the Indians. That is an out-and-out lie. Now, that's not saying there weren't acts of violence committed against Indians in the United States. That's true. We all know that historically to be true. But the Pilgrims didn't do that. The Pilgrims were devout Christians, and they actually got along with the Indians. Our Thanksgiving tradition actually came from Indians and the Pilgrims, or Puritans as they were called back then. They sat down with them in the fall of 1621 to have a dinner, and they were thanking the Indians for helping them plant corn and survive. They were going to be able to survive the winter because the previous winter, half of them died from starvation, exposure, and disease. And so they were actually getting along pretty well with the Indians, and there was no violence between them. They actually got along really well. So that is not historically accurate. Pilgrims were not racist towards the Indians. They actually loved the Indians. They really did. They were Christians, devout Christians. And so Hilary Duff has no reason historically to apologize to the Indians. Now, here's where she should apologize. And this is what really gets me as a Christian, as a devout Christian. She was dressed as a quote-unquote sexy pilgrim. I saw the outfit. she was not dressed as a sexy pilgrim. Substitute the word whore for sexy, and you'll have it more accurate. She was dressed like a pilgrim whore. Her clothing left very little to be desired from the waist down. She was exposing way too much of herself in this little skimpy outfit. So she was not dressed as a sexy pilgrim, she was dressed as a pilgrim whore. And that's what is offensive to Christians. You see, she was actually mocking the Puritans. They weren't mocking the Indians, she was mocking the Christians. But hey, nobody needs to apologize for that in today's society, do they? No one needs to apologize for offending Christians, for mocking their religion. You know, the Huffington Post said it's not a good idea to dress up as anyone else's culture. And they were talking about the Indian costume. They weren't talking about the pilgrim culture. You see, part of my relatives, I'm part Chickasaw Indian, by the way, and so some of my relatives are Indians. And some of my relatives were probably pilgrims because my family, the other side of my family, came from England. And that's where the pilgrims came from. They originally came from England. And so that was part of my culture. And I'm a Christian. And the pilgrims came up with the Mayflower Compact, which served as sort of the cornerstone of our United States Constitution. So we actually owe a lot to the pilgrims. We actually should be honoring them. And so saying that they're a bunch of whores, basically, by dressing up like some pilgrim whore, is highly offensive to devout Christians and pilgrims. And it's mocking the pilgrims. It wasn't mocking the Indians. It was mocking the pilgrims. But you're not going to hear the Huffington Post get huffy and puffy about that. You're not going to hear Hillary Duff apologized for that, and Mr. Walsh did not apologize for that. No, they apologized for him dressing as an Indian would. There was nothing offensive about his dress. So she was, and here's another thing. She really was not just dressed, and this is the incredible thing, she really wasn't just dressed as a pilgrim whore. She was wearing, from the top half up, she was dressed in the man's outfit, not the woman's. She wasn't dressed as a female pilgrim whore. She was dressed as a man. So I guess you could say she was a cross-dressing transvestite pilgrim whore. I can't imagine that she could have gone to any further length to make this more offensive to Christians unless she wanted to make it out, instead of solid black and white, that it would be solid red, and she could have been a communist pilgrim whore. I just cannot imagine that she could do anything that might be more offensive to Christians. But nobody seems to have a problem with that. Now, if she really wanted to be historically accurate, and still dress up as a couple, and she wanted to dress, like a whore, then probably what they should have done was her boyfriend should have dressed as Bill Clinton, and Hillary Duff should have dressed as Monica Lewinsky. Then she could have worn a real short blue dress with a stain on it, and that would have been historically accurate. That would have been historically accurate and might have said something about this year's election. That probably would have gotten them a lot of good press from Trump fans. But something tells me they were not trying to impress Trump fans. And we all know that Bill Clinton is a documented whoremonger, so that is absolutely historically accurate. Today, folks, it is not uncommon for people to insult Christians and do this, and this is the hypocrisy of the worldly society that we live in today. For instance, when our ministry preached at both the Republican and Democrat National Convention this year. And when we did, we had people that would come up to us and they would say, well, you need to be preaching love, you sorry blankety blank blank blank, and flip us a bird, and we'd say, wow, we could just feel the love oozing out of you like battery acid right out of your pores. Folks, the world does not love Christians. The world hates Christians, and it's okay for them to mock us, but what we need to be doing is standing up. We need to stand up and speak and be heard and not let them get away with this. Folks, I'll be right back. This is Pastor David Grisham with Last Frontier Evangelism. Be right back after the break.